Good morning and welcome back to Hot Mess Life Coach Season 3, Episode 3. I'm your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, because yes, that is too allowed. I help people find and trust their own inner wisdom so that they always know what to do. And this is the show for people trying to get it together while the world seems to be falling apart. And as I mentioned last week, we're going to be digging deep into Toltec wisdom concepts this week. And so I have again with me my friend and special guest and fellow life coach, Morgan Barbret, who is a resilience coach that helps people bounce back. Morgan, welcome and thank you for being here.
Hey, Brian, I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, me too. So today we're going to talk about the concept of the judge and the victim. And just to recap, what we're talking about here is everything is based off this book, The Four Agreements. So for those following along at home, and I spoke in episode 1 of this season about Toltec wisdom in general and what Toltec is and how the word just means artist. And so this doesn't apply to just one single cultural group. It applies across the board to all of humanity. And then last week, we dug deep on the concept of domestication, which we also can call socialization, which is sort of just the way that we were brought up to believe and how those belief systems shape our behavior, shape our culture, shape our reactions to things, and essentially shape our whole lives. And today, what I want to talk about, what we're going to get into here, is the concept of the judge and the victim, which are two of the loudest voices inside the human brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, Morgan, before we jump in, is there anything you want to say? How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about this because the dominant voices that are occurring in our mind all the time, which often we don't even notice, are this judge and victim. So I'm excited to kind of bring some awareness around those.
Yeah, right on. Me too. So let's start with what the in chapter 1, or I think it's actually in the introduction, they called it the Book of Law. The Book of Law is just what the Toltec call our belief system. It's just another way of naming the belief system. So it's like the rules that we live by. It's the result of our domestication. So we talked last week about domestication, and that leads directly into this conversation because the judge is there, that voice in our head that's judging us is there to enforce the book of law, which is in place because of our domestication. So we've been domesticated by parents, by teachers, by friends, by the media, and now eventually as grown adults, we domesticate ourselves. This is a natural process. It's not bad or wrong. It's just how evolution works. But because of domestication, we end up with a belief system. Oftentimes, a large chunk of that belief system is not really our own. We haven't thought it through. Like it's just been passed down, like cultural traits, for example. Like, we all should park in the driveway instead of on the street in front of the house. Well, who says? That's just what everybody in our house does. I'm using a really innocuous example because it doesn't actually matter if the belief system, if the specific belief causes suffering or not. What matters is like how aware you are of the belief and whether you've thought it through or not. So why not just park in front of your house instead of in the driveway? What difference does it really make? But you might never have thought to even check on that because everyone in your family just always parks in the driveway and that's what's done. So instead of following the that's what's done protocol, which is the book of law, the unconscious book of law that we inherited, we're going to start becoming aware of what's in the book of law and how it sounds in our mind. And usually it sounds really judgmental. And
Yeah.
so that's the judge. And so that's the part of our mind. The judge is the part of our mind that enforces the book of law, which is a result of how we've been domesticated. The judge in our minds judges everything. It judges the weather. It judges our friends. It judges our family. It judges the state of the world. It judges fashion. It judges television, news, trends on social media. Like it judges it all. And the what it judges based on is the book of law, which is the rules that we're meant to follow, the rules that we think as an individual we're supposed to follow. My book of law is going to be a little bit different than your book of law, which is going to be a little bit different than the next person's book of law. Even if we all follow even if we were all Christians, for example, and we technically have the same book we follow, like we still, each Christian in their own life has their own separate little book of law, which is because it's their individual belief system based on how they were individually raised. And so because the book isn't the same, the judge inside your mind isn't going to judge you based on the same things that the judge inside my mind is going to judge me on. Like I might not have a judge in my mind that is really all that bothered when I cut people off in traffic. You might have a rule about that in your book of law. And so you might have a judge in your mind that is like, you cut that person off in traffic, you're bad, you're wrong, you're awful, you know? And so not everyone's judge is going to be exactly the same, but the results are the same. The result is that when the judge judges, the victim is kicked up into high gear and the victim comes online. And the victim is the part of our mind, the part of our self that feels the weight of the enforcement from the judge. So the judge says, good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no. And the victim says, woe is me. I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. I feel I'm to blame. You know, I messed up. I made a mistake. So this dichotomy in our minds, having the part of us that judges and the part of us that is victimized by judgment, we can boil that down in colloquial terms to what we call imposter syndrome. That's where imposter syndrome comes from. It comes from the part of our mind that feels victimized, that feels less than, that feels like, okay, I'm not actually up to snuff. Like I'm going through my life as a fraud. I'm going through my life pretending. So the victim carries all the shame and guilt and blame related to the judge.
So
So
Brian, you're explaining this on a very high level. I want to kind of like break it down into a very small, simple example that people can kind of like grasp onto. So for example, if you're scrolling on social media and perhaps you've seen a little short video where somebody is making some form of judgment or opinion about like how you should wear your clothes. Like, oh, if you wear your clothes this way, that's not fashionable. You're wrong. Don't do this. Here's how you should style your outfit differently. Here's the right way. And so if you look at that and a part of you agrees with it or believes that, this person is someone who is right to be making an opinion about fashion, then your judge will say, like, if I've ever worn my clothes that way, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I was not fashionable, and therefore I'm a problem. And then your victim will feel shame or guilt over having made that mistake because it believes this judgment. And so that's an example of how when you see something in the external world, it becomes internalized and put into your book of law. And then your judge judges you based on that law or that rule that it has, come to believe. And then this other part of you, this other half of you feels bad because of this judgment that has been made.
yeah, that's a great example. Thank you for bringing it down into like a real world scenario, because that's the whole point here, is that it's not just conceptual. It affects how we live. It affects our mood moment to moment. It affects our decision making process moment to moment. And without awareness, we just go through our lives judging ourselves and then feeling
Mm-hmm.
victimized by that judgment. Can you think of an example in your own life where you have held that gavel up to your victim and basically smacked yourself in the face with it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, a lot of people either, my age or just women in general, like the judge is very active around body image, around looks. And so if you see images of people who look very healthy, happy, skinny, like acne free, whatever, then your judge creates this image of what perfection looks like, of what my body should look like, of what my face should look like. And the more that you're exposed to images of like that perfection, the more intense your judge becomes. And so then when you are at home with yourself and you look in the mirror, you see all the ways where you or what you see about yourself doesn't match up with this, theoretical image of perfection, which, none of us really have to match up with, but the judge says you do. And if you don't match up with that image of perfection, then you should feel ashamed of yourself, which is not true.
Yeah, it's not true, because where did we get the idea of that level of perfection? Where did we get the idea of perfection? Like in this case, what you're describing, it's like domestication from the media.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that domestication comes from other places too. Sometimes the same message comes from more than one place. Oftentimes it does. But in this example, we can see really clearly how the book of law is formed by stuff outside of us, outside of our preferences, outside of our opinions. Like outside, like where did I get the idea that all men should have more hair? Like Look at this. Like, why does that have to be a problem? You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I spent decades like judging myself when like for my hair falling out. Like I had no
Yeah.
control over my hair falling out. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
that's not anything I could control. And like at some point, but I felt I was a victim to it because
Yeah.
my book of law said men should have this quaff, you know, and I like a good quaff on a guy when I see it. So like, you know, I'm not gonna lie, like
Yeah.
the quaff is nice. That's in my book of law, but it's
But
just
you
not.
not having a quaff doesn't detract from your value as a human being. It doesn't make you any less, and it's not something that you like that it's right for you to feel ashamed about, because it's not shameful to not be 100% matching this image of perfection all the time.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying that. I think I still needed to hear it. Bald is the new hairy. I don't know, but it's good. Thank you.
I don't
Yeah.
know if that,
No,
Harry.
that didn't quite work out because I don't know, but it's true. It's true. And as much as I've been on a healing journey and you know, I'm going through a spiritual awakening, I'm heading down the road towards enlightenment. I still need to hear that. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
you're fine. You're fine. Even with your Lex Luthor looking hairdo, like you're fine, you
You're
know,
not just
like,
fine, you're wonderful.
wonderful. Yeah. See, I don't think I'm ready to say wonderful. Like that's how powerful the judge and the victim really
Yeah,
are, you know?
right. Well, and the core assumption that the judge makes is I am supposed to do everything perfectly. I am supposed to do everything perfectly. And the judge doesn't understand that it's not possible to do everything perfectly. And so it'll take you out by making you feel like you have to match that standard or else.
Yeah. Exactly. That's so right. And it's the judge's job to try to get you to perform. Like this is the thing. What's leading me to think of now is like the internal family system stuff of how
Mhm.
there's no bad parts. And the judge and the victim in that sense, if you look through the lens of internal family systems, they can just be seen as parts. And actually the judge, even though it has a less than functional and less than kind way of going about it, the judge is trying to be our ally because the judge
Yeah.
is trying to get us to be perfect. And the judge doesn't understand that perfection isn't possible. And sometimes even we don't really understand fully deeply that perfection isn't possible because of our book of law. But when we start to make room for that we're after progress and not perfection, we can see that the judge trying to make us behave perfectly is actually the judge trying to be our ally. The
Hmm.
judge is trying to be a friend to us. And so the judge, as we have this conversation here, for anyone out there listening or watching, or even if you hear this later from the future, like the judge is not something for you to then judge. That's just the judge in a, you know, different robe with a heavier gavel judging the part of you that you just realized was a judge. So that's still the
Yeah.
judge. So the judge also doesn't need our judgment. What it needs is our love and acceptance and our understanding. It's self-awareness that dissipates the power of these. It's not judgment. Does that make sense?
Well, that leads into a question that I wanted to ask you anyhow, and you kind of already started to answer it. But what do you think is the most helpful way to deal with the judge or to work with it compassionately? Like, is it something where we're just questioning the beliefs that it is posing or imposing on us, or do we just like tell it to shut up? What is the way to,
Hmm.
you know, effectively work with this part of ourselves that so often it feels like it's working against us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me it has to do with self gentleness for sure, and like a form of internal kindness. When I try to tell the judge to shut up, I'm actually just that's actually the judge shouting at the victim
Mm. Oh,
in,
okay. That's
in the
interesting.
end. Like it feels like you're telling the judge to shut up, but you've just embodied the judge, and you're telling
Mm.
what you think is the judge to shut up, which is really you victimizing yourself. And so then you're just paying for the mistake of having judged yourself once by judging yourself again. Which really quick, then what I want to cover is the concept of justice before we go back to fully answering your
Yeah.
question, because the Toltec talk about how real justice is paying for every mistake only one time. And with this judge victim cycle, what we do is we pay for mistakes over and over and over again, because
Yeah.
like we'll have made a mistake. Oh, I shouldn't have, spoken to my sister that way or whatever. And then we go and tell her we're sorry and she forgives us. And then the next day we're like, God, what a shit brother I am for talking to my sister that way. We pay for the mistake all over again. And then 2 weeks later, when we're feeling frustrated with our sister, we're like, oh man, I'm such a bad brother. I want to talk to her that way again. And that's what I did last time. And we just like relive the mistake and we relive the mistake and we relive the mistake. Telling the judge to shut up is a very similar dynamic to that, where we're just sort of reliving the same error in judgment again. And that time it's very meta, because we're living the error in judgment of judging, but we're living that error again by judging again. And so part of the way forward with the judge and the victim is to do what we can to not judge the judge, which is, I think, why we started talking a minute ago about how the judge is our ally. It's like really reconceptualizing the judge and the victim as both integral parts of us that are both trying to protect us. The judge is trying to keep us from making mistakes, and the victim is trying to make those mistakes right. So they're both trying to keep us safe, which is the key. And in the Toltec, they also talk about how it takes a lot of courage to change our belief system, which is just another way of saying it takes courage to rewrite the book of law, because the current book of law, the current belief system, we know it really, really well. And so it keeps us safe. And so the judge is there enforcing the current belief system because he wants to keep us safe. And the victim is there, woe is meing the current belief system, because it wants to do what's right by the belief system that it believes is in place to keep us safe. So in answer to
there's an inherent feeling of like lack of safety that starts to like crop up, or like discomfort, when you start to question these beliefs that have been held for such a long time.
Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it. I mean, don't you feel that way?
Yeah.
Like an example for me is like in my early 20s, I was a born again Christian for a while, and I had like a few years in like that really like sort of evangelical place. Like I like to joke around now that since then I died again, because like I don't like, I do believe so much of the Christian values, like love one another, love above all else, like that kind of stuff. Like I think Jesus is this great example of a compassionate being whose compassion is unmatched on the planet. I always want to make sure I say that, because like I don't have anything against the Christian message. It's the idea that God cares what I do with my penis that just didn't resonate with me, and I was like I'm sorry, I'm not that. So that's just not, no, you know what I mean? He's got too many bigger fish to fry. But so the point of all of this was, I'm a gay person, and when I was really starting to embrace that identity, it was late for me. I was in my early 20s, and it was in direct competition with my born again belief system. And so when I would question the beliefs, the born again beliefs that I had of like, well, all homosexuals are going to hell just because God's a petty asshole. And I was like, well, I don't know. I guess that seemed reasonable in high school. I belong to, but I'm not sure it seems totally reasonable now with all this shit going on in the world. Like, why does he care what color stripes are on my flag? You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, but the beginnings of those questions, like, am I really doomed if I embrace my homosexuality? Like, am I really doomed to hell if I admit that I like 6-pack abs and a bubble butt? Like, I don't know.
It's almost like the judge intensifies and like really tries to keep you believing what you're believing as you're trying to break free from it. So when you give it the sign that you're like, hey, like maybe you're full of shit, then it's like, but think about all these things that I've been trying to impose on you for your entire life. Remember this belief, remember that belief, remember that belief. And you have to like you said, be courageous and keep pushing and keep exploring and questioning in order to eventually break free from that.
Yeah, it's like as you were talking, I'm picturing this little cartoon judge up there with pulling out a second gavel and being like, "Order in the court!" You know, like Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Like the judge suddenly
literally
the witness, because that is what it is. It's like you sort of feel badgered by your own mind. You know what I mean? And that's how it felt for me. Like, so questioning our beliefs is scary. Like, my beliefs in there's only one pathway to God were sacrosanct at the time. And they kept me safe, and they gave me a lot of love and acceptance in high school, and they grounded me in my early 20s. And so throwing those over in favor of a deeper belief in myself and acceptance of who I really am was very, very scary. But
Very scary.
as you bring in the new beliefs, like, and you start to adopt those, you can ground yourself in the new belief system, but that takes time. And so railing against the judge and the victim actually can prolong that changeover, that
Hmm.
shift in beliefs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So that's why we need like the more gentle, compassionate, questioning, aiming for awareness kind of approach rather than like really trying to attack your own judge.
Yeah, I think so, exactly. Because I mean, think about it, like, even in life, like, we're talking about the human mind here, so we're talking about human nature. And it's like, if I live with my niece and nephew, and they're 5 and 8. And I've had moments where I've gotten frustrated with them. And if I use my frustration to try to impose what I want to happen on them, it either causes in them fear and crumbling, or total rebellion. But
Mm.
in no situation does me trying to impose my way cause voluntary cooperation and harmony. Like, it just doesn't fucking happen that way. Sorry, no. And so why would
Yeah.
we think that imposing upon ourselves is going to cause voluntary cooperation and harmony internally? Because we're still human nature, we're still the human mind. It's still like there's the little child in there. Like, when you go to internal family systems work, like, oftentimes some of our parts are very young. You know what I mean? So some of our victims might be very, very small, and like, they need that same nurturing that my 8-year-old niece and my 5-year-old nephew need in order to come out of their shell and sort of decide for themselves what they believe. And that's what we're talking about here, is a part of you inside that is domesticated and has had the adult world impose upon it its beliefs. And now that part of you is actually 40, and it's like, oh, well, how do I come out of my shell? And it's going to be the same way you would bring an 8-year-old out of their shell. Like, why don't we try coloring a little bit, and you can tell me what you think about the world and the nature of reality and God, instead of me telling you what I think and trying to
Hmm.
impose my will on you.
So would it be fair to say that like when we feel or experience shame, part of it's because we're trying to impose our will like on our inner child? Is that
Ooh,
too?
no. I mean, you're framing it up for me in a brand new way, but I think that's great. Like, because, like, I have seen with little kids the way being told they've made a mistake causes immediate shame, whereas being asked questions like, why did you approach it that way? How might you have approached it differently? How do you think the
Hmm.
other child is feeling inside? Doesn't impose the same level of shame. Instead, it activates the curiosity muscle. And
Yeah.
so I think you're onto something where imposing something on our victim is an inner child. It's going to kick up shame, because that happens with little kids for real. And it's no
Yeah.
different. The parts of our mind are no different than real human beings. We're just dealing with, like, the multiplicity of being one human with part multitudes contained within us.
Yeah. I'm just imagining like how like in an example where you're like really judging yourself, how differently and more like healing it would feel to be asking those questions to yourself as an alternative. Like, okay, why did you do it that way? It's okay that you did, but let's look at it. Like, it's okay to look at it, and you're not wrong, and you're not horrible for doing it the way that you did, but let's learn from it. Let's make this a valuable experience.
Yeah, exactly. Centering learning, that's key to it. I love that. Like, ask the questions, because, like, what were you intending to happen when you yelled at your mom or hit your brother? Like, what were
Mhm.
you hoping for? Like, that's much better than, no, we don't hit. I've told you that a million times. Like, okay, I mean, it's like a developing brain, and, like, we know now with neuroplasticity that we're all a developing brain. So, like, our brains are still developing brains too. Yeah, like, I mean, curiosity is a very, very powerful mechanism. And I think this goes back to the question you had asked like 10 minutes ago about how do we navigate the judge and the victim. And I think it's this, like this, what we're talking about now, like approach it
Yeah.
the way you approach a child, with gentleness, with kindness, and even more with curiosity. You know,
Hmm.
like, where did that impulse come from?
Yeah.
And then you start
So,
uncovering your domestication. Is that my impulse? Is that my mother? Is that my boss?
mhm.
Is that Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell? Like, where did that impulse come from?
By the bill. So, for example, you know, earlier I mentioned standing in the mirror and judging yourself compared to an image of perfection. I, maybe you have other, questions or examples to meet yourself with when you're in that moment. But the one that's kind of coming to mind for me now is like, if I'm feeling shame, I could look at myself and be like, what do you need right now? Like, what would help you feel more comfortable in this moment? What would help you feel more confident in this moment? Like, rather than like really just focusing on, here is that hair that's out of place, or here's that this thing about your nose or whatever, shifting that focus from what's wrong with me to what do I need?
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh, that gave me goosebumps, because that's foundationally more compassionate. What do I need? And
Mm-hmm.
like that's what this thing about self gentleness and self compassion feels foreign to us, because it's countercultural, because we live in this productivity workaday culture. But it's not countercultural to be kind to other people. We lap up unexpected acts of kindness and unprovoked. Like, we love
Mm-hmm.
that, but we
Yeah.
just don't think that's what we should do for us. You know, like if
Yeah.
you see a little kid wandering around a shopping mall alone, you go right up to them and you say, "What do you need? Where's your mom? How can I help you?" But
Mm-hmm.
the little part of you wandering around in the shopping mall of your mind, dizzy and lost, you go, "God, you fucking idiot! Why? How'd you lose the judge, you dumbass?" And it's just so different.
That
Like
makes me want to cry.
yeah, me too. I mean, there's no reason we can't give ourselves that same kind of love and compassion. In fact, I think it's almost like a cosmic imperative, if we want to be part of this shifting of human consciousness, to learn the master the art of self gentleness and self kindness,
Mm-hmm. Self love.
self love, as resilience coach Morgan Barbret of Self Love Atlas Coaching would attest. So that this is a good segue into our exercise. I had a different exercise planned, but as in the coaching world, we like to be in perpetual creative response to whatever is
Oh yeah,
present. So I'm going to teach something different instead, real quick.
I
Um,
love it.
this is called internal self talk. It's a new tool from Martha Beck. The abbreviation is KIST, KIST, kind internal self talk. And I always like to say that's like, because think of it as like you're being kissed by your higher self. And the way that you do this is you get calm, the way you would start any other meditation practice. And so you get calm, you take a few deep breaths, ground yourself into the moment, and find a quiet place where you can be alone. And this can only has to take you 5 minutes. And you do kind internal self talk. So you look inward at whatever part of you is suffering. So say there's a part of you that feels anxious, or there's a part of you that feels angry, or there's a part of you that feels ashamed, whatever it is. You go to the part that's suffering in that moment and you say, "I've got you." And you just imagine it. Imagine whatever it looks like. It could be a little black blob with spiky points on it. It could be a cartoon porcupine. It could be you at a younger age. Whatever comes up for you in your mind is the right image in that moment. And it can change every time you do the meditation. That's fine too. So you just picture that part of yourself. And then you picture it climbing up into your lap. And you picture yourself embracing it. And you can literally rock back and forth, like rock back and forth, and you say, "I've got you now. I've got you." And then you start doing internal kind self-talk. You don't ask it any questions yet. Like what Mo and I were talking about in the episode today, that comes right after this. First you do internal kind self-talk, and then you can start being curious and asking questions. And the internal kind self-talk is things like this: anyone who's been through what you've been through would feel this way right now. How you feel is okay. I've got you. You can fall apart now. You can let go now. I've got you. And you just keep repeating that over and over until you feel inside you the shift from resistance to the truth of how you feel to acceptance of how you feel. That's the sign that you've left the territory of judgment and victimhood into the territory of self acceptance. In that new territory, once you've felt that shift from the kind internal self talk, then you can get curious and say, what were you after? What were you up to? What were you hoping that would achieve? What might be a better way to approach it in the future? But you don't move into that interview process until you've been kind. It would be like asking the kid in the mall a million questions about, well, where did you see your mom last? Where were you guys headed? What was her next door she was supposed to go to? Before you even had a chance to calm the child down. First, calm them down. Sit next to them, come to their eye level, distract them, tell them a joke, kind internal self-talk. And then when they're calm, you can say, okay, let's think this through. What was the last thing you remember your mom saying? That's when you get into questions. And it's the same with our brain. Calm yourself down, kind internal self-talk, and then get curious.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we end for today?
Just going off of the examples you gave for kind self-talk, that kind self-talk is not like affirmations where you're trying to like make yourself believe a new positive thing. It's literally just intended to be comforting your inner child and getting you to a place of calm, making it okay for you to feel whatever you're actively feeling, so that then we can go into the questioning and build some awareness.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because that's actually a really key point here. It's not about trying to convince yourself of anything that you don't feel is true at the time. It's trying to embrace the truth of how you feel in the moment. That's key.
Yeah.
It's comfort. It's about comfort. So thank you, Mo, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today or from the future or from listening to this on the podcast. If you know of anyone who might benefit from what you heard here today, please share this, tag this, like it, link it, whatever you do out there in social media world. You can follow Morgan online at selfloveatlas.coaching or selfloveatlas.coach, actually, I think is what it is.
Coach. Yeah.
Selfloveatlas.coach is her website where you can learn more about her services, or you can follow her on Instagram at Morgan Barbret, MorganBarbret. And to learn more about me and what I do, you can visit thebrianhogan.com for more information and to apply for coaching. In the meantime, we will both be back next week for episode 4 on Thursday, April 20th at April 27th at 10:37 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love. Bye, everybody.
Bye.